Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, we had some technical issue. That's why we are starting behind, the time. How has your day been? How is everything going on? Hope you guys are making the judicious use of the day. The day is almost gone. So as usual, I will just give a couple of seconds to allow most of you guys to come in before we continue with the business of the day. Okay, I think I'll just take it up from here. We have quite a number from the participant list. Good afternoon once again. For those of you guys that are joining us for the first time, my name is Gagba Esahaya, and I'm the training coordinator with the Temple Small Business Development Center. The Temple Small Business Development Center helps small businesses start and grow. But we offer free one-on-one consulting and a variety of low to no cost webinars. We are proud to be part of the nationally accredited network of the Small Business Development Center, which has over 1,000 networks across the United States. You are here this afternoon for a webinar. A copy of the PowerPoint and a link to the recording will be sent to all the attendees. Being a webinar, all the attendees have been muted. However, we always encourage you guys to drop your question on the Q&A or the chat box. Without further ado, please allow me to welcome our wonderful presenter, even as he takes over the floor for the presentation. Master Steve, you are welcome.
Thank you very much, Karma. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second session of podcasting for business, particularly for small business. In today's episode, we're going to talk about how to manufacture your podcast, and I have a few slides and a couple of examples that I'll show you of both hardware and software that you can use to begin thinking about producing your podcast. So let me just share up the slides so that we can talk a little bit about the different tools that are available. So the first thing I'll talk about is hardware. The nice thing about podcasting is that you don't necessarily need very elaborate hardware to produce your podcasts, but if you do make an investment in some decent hardware, you have a lot more flexibility in producing podcasts. And probably the most important thing to think about when you're planning to create a podcast is going to be a microphone. You do need some sort of microphone. Many people start out by using the built-in microphone in a laptop computer. And I'm here to tell you that that is probably the least desirable option, although it is obviously the least expensive since you already have the laptop with the microphone built in. The problem with using a built-in microphone in a laptop is that it's picking up all of the vibrations associated with the laptop. And that means when you tap on the keyboard or just the cooling fan within the laptop itself is being picked up as a low-level hum throughout the recording process. Also, the microphone in your laptop is not at the optimal distance from your mouth. The optimal distance from your mouth is like 1 fist away. And typically you're sitting here and your laptop is down on the desk in front of you. And what that does is, in addition to the noise from the laptop fan, it also is going to introduce an enormous amount of room reflection if you're in a room that has hard walls or glass. And that's where you get that echoey sound where people sound like they're inside a trash can or inside some kind of a wind tunnel when they're talking on a typical Zoom call. What you want to do is you want to have the microphone close to your mouth, like I say, about 1 fist away. And that can be either a lavalier-like microphone like the one I'm wearing today, which clips onto your clothing, or it can be a boom microphone, something like the one. I can tilt my camera just a little bit so you can see the boom microphone. This is a microphone that is plugged into a mixer, and we'll get to that in a minute. But you really want to think about getting some kind of a microphone. Now, there are many kinds of microphones you can get. The best kind are professional audio microphones that plug into a mixer, and then the mixer plugs into your computer through a USB connection. But there are microphones that plug directly into USB, and they are fairly popular and reasonably priced for the most part, so you might want to consider using those. And without going into a whole big thing about microphone selection, I would just encourage you to take a look at microphones. Google microphone for podcast, and you'll find a wide range of prices and features and technology. You have to decide what fits your budget, but I would strongly encourage you to think in terms of some sort of external microphone for recording your podcasts. The second piece of equipment is whether you use a digital audio recorder or whether you record directly to your computer. For most beginning podcasters, recording to the computer is the way they go, and that's fine except for a couple of things. If you start to do recordings where you have guests and you're connecting with guests and using the computer, very often your computer decides that's exactly the right time to perform an update of some software. And the updates, like Windows Update or an update on an Apple machine, can often interfere with the recording process or completely crash it. And so from my perspective as a professional podcast producer, I prefer to have a dedicated piece of equipment to record the initial audio tracks. If I'm interviewing someone for a podcast or I'm interviewing someone for client podcasts, we use an external audio recorder. On the screen you see several different types, and I can show you some of these. Let me just bring up a shared screen to a window that I opened. There are, let's see. I'm sorry here. I'm looking for the screen. It's probably right behind what I have on my screen right now, or it's minimized. And that could be too. Let's see. Here it is. Just give me one more sec. Sorry, I didn't have this ready to go, but I think we can do it now. I hope. One more time into sharing, and there it is. Okay. So what you're looking at right now is Tascam, which is the parent company. Some of you may have remembered TEAC, T-E-A-C, as a professional audio recording company from the 1970s and 80s. The parent company, Tascam, produces a wide range of field recorders, they're called. These are broadcast quality recorders of varying sizes, ranging from the DR05X, which is a little handheld unit, to a little more sophisticated units. And as you go down the page, you see these are getting more and more complicated. You probably don't need the recorder mixers for production audio, but you may someday, and you may want to get into some multi-channel recordings. One of the issues that we faced fairly early on in producing podcasts was our clients were asking us to produce podcasts from panel discussions. And it's a lot easier to record panel discussions if each speaker in the panel discussion has a microphone and each microphone has its own individual audio track, because then when you're mixing and editing...
Hey, Steve?
Yes?
I got a message from Laura that you need me to log back in.
I need to log back in?
Or I did. Laura had messaged me and said,
"Oh, I'm
Steve
sorry.
needs you to log..."
Yeah, I'm sorry, folks. I have two things going on here. I will be back in just 1 minute. I have to deal with a client emergency here. Dr. Bora, what you need to do is, I think you've logged in. You need to log into the upload page. Did you get the email I sent you?
Yes.
And there should be a link in there, and if you can click on that link.
I have to join the recording, click on this link.
Yeah, if you would do that, that should bring you back and finish the upload. That's really what the problem was.
Okay, I think that took me to this, though.
Did it? Okay, let's see what's going on. Give me 1 second, because I am conducting a Zoom. I have to just apologize to my audience on the Zoom. No, that's not your fault. Folks on the Zoom, I'll be back in just a minute. I'm going to put you on my color bars and mute my microphone while I talk to my client here. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
Please, this goes to our attendees. Kindly give Mr. Steve a couple of minutes, even as he sorts out, the problem he is actually handling at hand. But even as we wait for him to come back, I just want to assure you guys that everything will move on smoothly. Please, if you have questions, try as much as possible to drop it on the Q&A or the chat box, and I bet you all your questions will be attended to by him. Thank you.
I apologize for the interruption. I think we're okay over on the other side. This is one of the things that happens in podcasting is, you know, things go wrong or slightly wrong, and then you have to fix them. The key thing for you is, you know, if you have podcasting clients, make sure that whoever your clients are, you know, that they don't see you sweat. So here we are back talking about hardware and talking about the kinds of recording tools you can use. And I think I left off talking about individual tracks and recording them on multi-track recorders. And that's, you know, it can be an advantage. It's not an absolute necessity. If you're recording a podcast with one or two people, a simple recorder, and typically I would say, you know, like the ones that you would be likely to use would be something like the ones in the upper left right-hand corner of the screen. Those are 4-channel recorders, so you can record up to 4 people at one time. And those are the ones that, you know, would work best for that. At the bottom of the screen, you see a couple of mixers, which allow you more flexibility. The one on the left is it's made by a company called Zoom, believe it or not. They're unrelated to the people who produce the Zoom webinar software that we're using today. But that is an 8-channel recorder. It's actually a 24-channel recorder because you can have 3 banks of 8 channels if you're doing musical recordings. But for my purposes, I found it really useful to be able to record 8 individual audio tracks at one time, and it's very portable, and I can take it out to client meetings with me and successfully get nice recordings where you can mute the microphones of the people who aren't speaking. And so you get a much cleaner recording when you do it that way. But that's a more advanced technique, and I don't want to spend too much time making you crazy thinking about that you have to do that, because you really don't. So let's talk a little bit about a range of tools you can use for editing your podcasts. Now, if you're recording directly, the question from Tamara Lynn is, does each microphone get plugged into the recorder to record on separate tracks? That's exactly right. On the 8-channel recorder, you're plugging a mic into each of those channels. And you can see the volume controls there. And then each channel is an individual audio file that you copy over to your computer and put into the editing software that we're about to talk about. And the advantage of that is when you get into the editing software, if you look at the software here on the right-hand side, upper right-hand corner, this is Adobe Audition. And I'll go through these in more detail in a minute. But you have individual sound files on each track, and each one of those can be edited individually, the volume adjusted, the sound quality tinkered with, and that gives you a lot more flexibility than if you simply record like the file on the left-hand side, which is called Audacity, where you have a single track where all the sound is in one track. It's a particularly useful technique when you have multiple speakers and they record and they talk over each other during an animated conversation, right? You want to have the ability to separate those voices so that everything that everybody says is clear for the audience. So let's talk a little bit about the editing software itself. As I said last week, and as I continue to say, you know, the range of budget appropriate categories for you is very large, ranging from totally free, why wouldn't you use it, to extremely expensive and complicated, and you're only going to use it if your client requires it or if you have specific audio editing needs that make you need that tool. So starting at the upper left on the slide on the screen is a program called Audacity. Audacity is, or was, and I should check on it, Audacity was a free program when it first became available. And I just want to double check to see if it is still free. Yeah, it's still free. It's produced now by an organization called audacityteam.org. I'll put the URL into the chat. Let me put it in for everyone. So you have that, and I can actually share the let me share the website for that. Okay, so we're sharing Audacity, and you can see it's an open source platform for audio editing. It's very simple to use. Most people can figure out how to use Audacity very, very easily. Let's just see if we can take a look at some of the features of Audacity. It has a lot of tutorials online. You know, it's fairly simple to use it for editing. Most people can figure out how to edit a stereo waveform fairly quickly. And again, it's free. So the price is right. You can download it for whatever flavor of computer you have and use it fairly quickly. As you go on in your podcast recording career, you're going to find yourself wanting to do more with your recordings. And so that's when you're going to say, maybe I should be using something else. And that's where programs like Adobe Audition would come in. And Audition is the one that I use because it is part of the Adobe Creative Cloud. So it's really, you know, a very useful and very professional tool. I think I am letting you look at it now, I hope. Let me stop the share and start it again. There we go. So right now what you should be looking at is the screen of Adobe Audition. This actually is the project file from a daily production I do of a 3-minute newscast, which I produce for a friend of mine who has an internet radio show. And what you see here is the blue track at the top of the screen is where I voice the actual news stories. The orange looking track where you see a tiny little bit of audio here is what we call in the radio business an actuality. It's a sound clip from someone else talking, which I insert into a news story to illustrate, enhance whatever the news story. And then when I'm done editing the complete news story from here, you know, say from this point here to this point here, which is one full story, we then can create a file from that by exporting it. The term in Adobe Audition is called rendering. It's different in most every program. But there, what's happening is it's taking those two tracks and merging them together with all of the edit settings that I've put on them, including over here some tools to enhance the sound quality. And then it makes a final, what's called a mix down. And that file is the audio file, or in your case would be the podcast. So the podcast production process in Adobe Audition is you record your audio from yourself and your guest. You edit the audio from yourself and your guest, and then you enhance the sound of it to make it sound nice. And you may do things like muting the microphone for the person who's not speaking. And what we've done here is to use a tool within Adobe Audition, which is called the volume envelope. You can see a white line here running across the sound, and then there are points called keyframes where you just, you know, you're basically saying, stop here and change the volume. And we're changing the volume to 0. And at this point, we're changing the volume back to the normal level. So basically what we're doing is just taking this part out. And where that would come in handy is if your host is talking and then asks a question, and then your guest starts to talk. So think of this as the host and think of this as the guest. And that's kind of what we're doing there. But what Audition and other more sophisticated programs, and frankly Audacity does this as well, is give you the ability to layer multiple tracks of audio, as you can see here, into your production. So you might have a music track, you might have, like I say, the news story track, which would be your host, and the actualities, which would be your guest. And you can have multiple guests. I can bring up another type of file here. Let me see, this is a good one. So this is a podcast production for one of my clients that we're opening. Just to give you an idea of how complicated the production can become, we pull it up in this format, and basically what you have me and 2 other speakers, and each one is on a separate audio track. We have an opening voiceover, we have a music bed to introduce it with some music, and then we have some music and some voiceover at the end. But each of these tracks is edited independently, but simultaneously, and you have a lot of flexibility in how it looks and sounds when you get done with it. That's pretty much true of all of the programs I'm showing you. It's really a very personal taste kind of a thing. There are people who have been using Audacity for years. We used it for probably about 5 or 6 years before I finally said, there's got to be more to the capabilities. I need to step up my game. And that's when we moved over to Audition. And right, it kind of coincided with Adobe. Some of you who may be doing Photoshop and even Audition or Adobe Premiere, the video program, may know this. Adobe moved from a software package model to a software subscription model. I guess it was about 5 or 6 years ago, where you pay a monthly fee that gives you access to all of the programs in the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite, it's called. So if you are paying them because you need to use Photoshop, Adobe Audition is part of that package if you buy the full package. And it's really affordable, I think, and it's a great value. A lot of people complain about it, but it runs about $50 or $60 a month, which is not insignificant, but you get every program that Adobe makes available and you get frequent updates. They update it probably a couple of times a month, and then a couple of times a year there are major updates. So I found that to be a really, really useful package to buy. Is it possible to record on separate tracks if you and your guest are in different locations? That's a great question, and we're going to get to that in just a minute, because I'm going to talk in a minute about some platforms that allow for remote recording. So bear with me, Tamara Lynn, and we'll get to that. In terms of the other programs on the slide we were looking at, we talked about Audacity, we talked about Adobe Audition. Another program that a lot of radio reporters like is called Hindenburg, and I misspelled it on the screen. It's B-U-R-G, like the dirigible. If you search on that, you'll find the program. It is aimed at people who do radio journalism. It's a little bit more, I find it less intuitive than Audacity and Audition, but many people swear by it. And people are producing, very sophisticated radio storytelling productions in Hindenburg. Once a year on World Radio Day, which just passed, I think it was last week, the company that makes Hindenburg makes available its baseline product to people for a very nominal fee. Otherwise, it tends to be pretty expensive. But you might look at Hindenburg if you do a lot of radio storytelling or audio documentaries. And then the other one on the lower left-hand side of the screen is called Reaper. Reaper is one that seems to be very popular with a lot of audio producers. Again, the program is free to try and use for either a limited time or with limited features. And then if you want, you can pay extra and get more features and more capabilities. It's one of those programs that's called freemium. It's free, but it has a premium version attached to it. So those are the kinds of software programs you could look at. talking about doing interviews with people where you're recording on separate tracks, as Tamerlyn is asking us. One way to do that is over Skype. If you're using Skype or Zoom, you can set up, and it's a little tricky, it's probably beyond the scope of this webinar, but you can actually set up your software to take the audio coming to you from Skype or Zoom into one track of your recording platform and your microphone into another track. It's not terribly hard to do, but again, it's probably beyond what we want to get into today. What I would like to show you, I'm going to skip that slide, are the platforms that allow you to do exactly what Tamerlyn's asking us about over the internet using a web-based platform. And these are platforms that provide a studio for you to record when your guest is remote. And there are a number of them. We've had some really good results recently using a program called Riverside.fm. What Riverside FM does is allow you and your guests to connect to a studio environment using a web browser, and all of the participants are recorded separately. And what Riverside FM does that's really useful is it records each participant locally, and while you are recording, it is continually uploading what they are recording to the cloud, so that by the end of your conversation, when you press the stop button on the recorder in the web interface, you just have to wait a couple of minutes and it will completely upload everything. And then what you get is very, very clean audio and video, because it's not subject to the bandwidth issues that you find on Zoom or on some other platforms when you're trying to record Zoom video and the person doesn't have a great connection to the internet. Too many people are trying to connect to Zoom or other video platforms using Wi-Fi connections. Sometimes that's the only alternative they have. And to be honest with you, it sometimes doesn't work that well. And you get pixelated images and the sound may go out. But what Riverside does, and actually what some of these other platforms do, is keep the recordings separate from the connection where you're seeing each other. The recording is happening in the background, but it's happening on your local machine. So it's not traveling over the internet to be recorded, it's recording and then uploading. And that gives us a way better quality signal. Just in the lower right-hand corner, the picture of me sitting in the studio with the guy on the screen was one of my early efforts where we were using Zoom as the platform, but I was also in my studio using a broadcast camera to record my side of the conversation while I was recording the Zoom conversation, and then using the miracles of video editing, putting the guy in the screen so that it looks like I'm talking to him on a flat panel. So that's a possibility. But all of the platforms you see, I hope I'm screen sharing the right screen. You're all seeing the slide. If anybody's not seeing the slide, let me know, right? Okay, good. So all of the platforms you see on the screen are a modern internet age version of what in radio we used to call a double ender. More popularly today, they call them tape syncs. And a tape sync or a double ender is where you have a guest in a remote city and you want to interview them, but you want good quality sound. You literally send out an audio engineer with a microphone and a recorder to sit and put the microphone in the guest's face while they talk to you in the studio over a telephone or a Zoom connection. And when the interview is done, the audio engineer who went to that person's location emails the recording to the studio, and then they synchronize it in post-production so that it sounds like you're sitting in the same studio. National Public Radio, CBC, all of the major networks, radio networks and even broadcast networks have done this for years, where they actually send people out. And I've actually done a number of tape syncs where I was sent out with my gear, sit in the guy's office while he's talking to the host, and then send them the file. And when they put it together, it sounds like they're in the same studio. These platforms allow you to do almost as good a job with that kind of double ender tape sync model without actually physically going there. So that's why these are really worth looking at. Riverside FM costs about $9 a month for 5 hours of recording. Zencaster, again, a similar kind of concept, just a different interface. They cost, I think, about $15 a month for unlimited use, but they don't I don't think they have the same audio capabilities as Riverside. Cleanfeed.net, which is at the bottom right of the screen, which we've used with some clients. Again, that's an audio-only recording platform. ipdtl.com, which you see in the upper left-hand corner of the screen, is a service that broadcasters are using around Europe, particularly for live remote broadcasts, but it has the recording capability for up to 4 guests, up to 6, if you pay for the premium product, and does a really, really fine job. And then there's one called Squadcast. Again, they're all very similar to each other. They do about the same thing. They just do it in different ways. A platform that we've used for our video productions, and we use sometimes for recorded video, but also for live streaming, is vMix. If you go to vmix.com, you can download a 60-day trial of the program, and it has several different flavors, including more recently, they've introduced a subscription-based product where you can pay a little bit each month because their high-end product is expensive. It's about $1,200. But what vMix does is it allows you to bring in up to 8 remote video guests into the recording and production platform, and you can produce live TV shows, as we've done. The example on the screen is a program we produce for NJ Spotlight News here in New Jersey, where each of the individuals you see on the screen is coming to us from a different remote location. This became particularly useful because of the pandemic. NJ Spotlight News has been a client of ours for about a dozen years. Used to do these events in person. And in March of 2020, right before the pandemic restrictions and quarantines were imposed, I went to their event producer and said, we really need to have a plan B. We need to be able to go out and do these programs virtually. And within a couple of days, we were set up and running, and we've been producing these on a two or three a month basis ever since. And they get live streamed onto another platform on the internet. And from there, we get several hundred people watching these programs. And then, of course, it's recorded and archived so people can go back and watch it on demand at a later time. So those are, it's a really broad overview of the kinds of platforms that we use. I'm happy to take more questions and talk more about it. So, feel free to ask some questions, and let's get a conversation going.
Okay, that's a good one, Steve. Thank you so much. Even as we wait for the participants to drop in further question, I am going to post a 30-second survey about today's webinar. Remember, we at Temple SPDC, we always cherish your feedback, even as it helps us to improve on the services we provide to you guys at a no cost. So I just posted the 30-second survey about today's webinar.
Great. And while people are looking at the survey, we have a question from Tamara Lynn.
Yes,
and I thank her for being a very active participant today. And the question is, does vMix use its own broadcast platform, or is it supported by Zoom and Skype? The question is a little bit complicated. The people coming into vMix, if you buy the vMix platform, you have access to a capability called vMix Call. That is where the remote guests log in. It's a whole separate platform from Zoom or Skype. It's completely independent. They log into vMix, and then the output from vMix is streamed out using a platform like Vimeo or YouTube or Facebook, and you can stream to multiple platforms at the same time. If you set it up, you have to configure certain things. But another thing that you can do with vMix is you can bring in guests over Skype or Zoom. And in fact, Zoom has recently released some technology called Zoom Rooms. And a Zoom Room is it's an upgrade to a typical Zoom subscription. If you buy a Zoom Room, you can then take the people who are in the Zoom room and bring their video individually into a vMix production. using a technology that is freely available called NDI. That's a video technology that allows people to share video feeds over the internet. And it's really robust and it's really cool, and we're looking forward to trying it with some of our clients. But I think broadly for most people, the audio podcasting is going to be a first step. Specific suggestions on best microphone pattern from Ryan for podcasting. Ideally, Ryan, you want to have a unidirectional microphone for both the host and the guest. And the difference is omnidirectional microphones, which are most microphones typically, omni means all, and it records, it picks up sound from every direction. And when you are and your guest are face to face, remember when we used to be face to face to interview someone? When you're face to face, you want to be looking at each other, but you don't want your microphone picking up what they're saying, because that makes it difficult. It causes some distortion, and you need to mute that more in the post-processing. If you have unidirectional microphone, the microphone has a narrower field pointing at you and one pointing at your guest. It reduces the amount of bleed through from the microphones so that you get a better sound quality on each person's mic. So I would say something unidirectional. Regina says she has a Focusrite for her Zoom meeting. Is it okay to use for podcasting? Absolutely. Focusrite is a kind of digital audio interface, very much like the mixers that we looked at. And we didn't spend a lot of time on the mixers. We'll look at them a little bit next time. But it connects to the computer using the USB connection. And then when you bring it into the computer, you have the ability to separate and assign the individual audio tracks from the Focusrite within your audio recording software. And you just have to follow the instructions to do that. But it's absolutely a good choice to use for podcasting. Thoughts on recording quality of modern iPhones? Actually, they are surprisingly good. And in a pinch, you can certainly use your iPhone. And what I can do is I'll share with the Small Business Development Center a graphic that I have used, pulled down from the net, of an instruction of how to use your iPhone to record a voice memo that can be sent to someone to be dropped into a podcast. I have one client who produces a weekly podcast. It's a TV show and podcast. And each week I have him, for each episode, I have him record into his iPhone using the voice memo feature, just the name and topic of the guest who's going to appear that week. And we have a recording set up, a template, if you will, for a radio style promo for that podcast. And then I can just change out the part where he says what the guest is. So we can keep using the same template, but each week we update it for the show that the guest is appearing that week. So that is working very well. And actually, it's very hard to tell the difference when you record on the iPhone, holding the phone against your head like a regular telephone, not using the speaker, but recording in the voice memo application with the phone against your head. You can get some really surprisingly good quality sound. Another way to use a modern iPhone, there is a company called Rode, R-O-D-E. They are a manufacturer of microphones for podcasters, and also some podcast audio mixer / recording devices. So if you can go to rode.com, you can see a wide range of devices. But one of the things they sell is a set of lavalier microphones and an adapter that plug into an iPhone's Thunderbolt jack. And then they have an app, which is free to download, which recognizes that adapter, and you plug the microphones into it, and it will record each microphone on a separate track, so that you can actually use your iPhone as a semi-professional recording device. It really produces quite a good audio quality. So, in a pinch, or if you don't want to carry a lot of equipment, that can be a great way to do an interview. You have one microphone on your guest, one on you, and you can just sit and chat and record it into your iPhone. The problem with using a phone, broadly speaking, again, goes back to my concern about having a dedicated device. I've always found that when I try to record something important using my phone, that's precisely the time when the phone decides the battery is going to die. Recording does put a bigger drain on the battery. And if you're using it for other things like making phone calls and browsing the web or other things are going on the phone, it's going to run the battery down. So it's always better to have a separate device if you can afford to, but it can work if you need to do it in a pinch. Absolutely. And if you look at press conferences or press gaggles on TV, look closely at what some of the reporters are using. A lot of them are using their phones to do that. So that's a great solution in a pinch. Still learning, thanks. How about ring lights? Ring lights are, if you're doing video, lighting is essential. We have some tips we can provide to people about lighting and audio for video, but the key thing is you can never have enough light for video, and most people don't. And so proper setup, whether it's a ring light or large LED lights of some sort, they're very inexpensive today. There are a number of suppliers, and people can, look at what they can afford, but definitely have some kind of lighting. And it's got to be in your face. It's not behind you, right? And you don't set up your camera with a bright, open, sunny window behind you, because that's going to, make your face kind of darken. And there are some tips and tricks that we can teach people about that. Karen's a little confused with the definition of a podcast. A podcast is typically audio only. Yes and no. The definition of a podcast originally was audio or video content that's distributed using RSS technology. Last week we talked about RSS. RSS is the really simple syndication that is sometimes referred to as the feed. It's the way you get your podcasts delivered to the podcast platforms like iTunes, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, and so on. So it can be audio, or it can be video. I prefer to call my video productions TV shows. It's a lot easier to understand. They're TV shows distributed over the internet. Podcasts are radio shows distributed over the internet. And again, podcast is being used as a term today by a lot of celebrities and professional broadcasters because it's a trendy term and it's the one that gets the most attention. But really what a lot of them are producing is really a syndicated radio show. They just have chosen not to deliver it to their subscribers over a satellite feed to local radio stations. They're delivering it over the internet, which gives them a much broader audience at a much lower cost. So you want to call it a podcast, call it a podcast. You want to call it CB radio, you can call it CB radio, but it's a broadcast over the internet using internet technology to deliver audio or video. Brian wants to know where you can find an audio release form. You can Google audio release form. If you need something more specific, Ryan, just drop me an email. My email address is on the screen. Hopefully it's readable. You can send me an email. I'll send it to you. Other questions, anybody?
Yeah. Well, we still got a couple of minutes left.
Okay.
Even as we still wait for more questions to come up on board, I just want to use this few minutes we have to thank you, Mr. Steve, for a wonderful presentation, and also my wonderful participants. I love the way questions actually came up on board during the presentation. I love the participation and everything. And of course, to my wonderful Temple SPDC colleague, just want to say a big thank you for your usual cooperation and encouragement, for making it possible for this webinar to come into existence. Once again, I would like to apologize for the technical difficulties we had, from the beginning of the webinar. Thank you. And let me just check the chat box for the last time to see if we have any question.
We're good. I think we answered them. We either answered them or we put them to sleep.
Okay, thank you guys, and do have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much, everybody. Good to see you.
Yes, please.